60 years ago, Israel fought and won a war for its independence. For Palestinians, defeat was a catastrophe. The two sides have been fighting ever since. What happened 60 years ago still shapes lives in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. If they want peace, they'll need to overcome the legacy of 1948. Gaza, home to 1.4 million Palestinians, most of whom are refugees from the land that became Israel. The current battleground in this long war lies in and around the Gaza Strip. Israel uses airstrikes and ground incursions. Palestinians rocket Israeli border towns. Both sides blame each other. Two miles to the north of Gaza, this is kibbutz Yad Mordechai. Some of the thousands of rockets fired into Israel have landed here. History is never far away. This kibbutz, or communal farm, was founded in the 1930s by Jews from Poland. They were Zionists who wanted to return to the biblical home of the Jews to make a state.
We build a society with our own hands, by new forms of life, not only by high technology. The kibbutzim and the development towns. Those are forms of life that without it you cannot understand what Israel is. We developed the best agriculture maybe on earth.
The Zionists had neighbors, Palestinian Arab farmers who'd been working the land for centuries.
The relationship between the two was normal and reasonably friendly. It was after 1930, with the massive land purchases, with the massive immigration, that the Palestinians became aware that their existence was at stake.
In 1943, the kibbutz took the name of Mordechai Anilevich, the Jew who led the uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto against the Nazis. They swore Jews would never be defenseless again.
There was no life in a camp like Auschwitz. So then I decided, should I survive, I become a Zionist activist. And by miracles, I did survive.
Yad Mordechai has its own Holocaust museum. They've also preserved the field where they fought the Egyptians during the 1948 war.
What happened here was a critical moment in the fight to create a Jewish state. 60 years on, Israelis have a lot to celebrate. It's been an extraordinary feat of nation building. But for Palestinians, every year this anniversary reminds them of what they call their catastrophe. For them, the last 60 years has been about dispossession and exile.
During Israel's independence war, around 700,000 Palestinians became refugees.
They left everything intact at their homes, everything. Some families even left their money, their jewels at home, and ran thinking that the storm will calm down and in 2 or 3 or months will come back.
But Israel stopped them returning. Many of Yad Mordechai's old Palestinian neighbors are still close by, refugees in the Gaza Strip. They call it the world's biggest prison.
Here, is a war which had led to the uprooting of a villager from his village. You know how attached a villager is to his olive tree, to his little home, to his house, to his mode of life, to his... It's something unimaginable. I mean, the Palestinian people are one of the oldest people in their habitation of Palestine.
The Palestinians have to do some soul-searching too. Why did it become a catastrophe? They could have accepted most of the land, a state of their own. They refused, not us, in 1947. We cannot apologize for their mistake.
In 1897, the Zionist movement in Europe met and declared that it wanted to found a state for Jews in Palestine. 2 years later, the Arab mayor of Jerusalem begged them to leave Palestine alone and warned there'd be an Arab uprising if they didn't.
After the meeting in 1897, 2 rabbis were sent to Palestine to see what the country was like. They reported back, the bride is beautiful, but she's married to another man. Some of the early Zionists warned that confrontation with the Arabs was going to be unavoidable. Others persuaded themselves that Arabs would be glad to see them because they were bringing with them European expertise.
The majority of Palestinian Arabs lived traditional lives in around 800 largely self-sufficient villages. Politics was local and tribal. Life was hard. These days in the refugee camps, it's idealized, a lost dream of a homeland.
Village life was great. We worked the land and sold the crops in Ramla, Lid, Hebron and Jaffa. We had olives, watermelons, cantaloupes, wheat and sesame. All these things. The people were happy and content.
Britain controlled Palestine between 1917 and 1948. In November 1917, as British troops were fighting their way up to Jerusalem, seizing Palestine from the Turks, the Foreign Secretary in London wrote a letter that became known as the Balfour Declaration.
The Balfour Declaration said the British would view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and use their best endeavours to make it happen. And it also said it was clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. Now, there's a whole series of incompatible promises in that, and the British never found a way to keep them. As a result, they were regarded as betrayers by both sides.
For the Zionists, it was a big step forward. But, said the writer Arthur Koestler, it was an impossible idea. One nation promising another the land of a third. It did a great deal to create the conflict that continues today. Small communities of religious Jews had remained in Palestine since Roman times. The new Jewish immigrants were different. Many were socialists and atheists who wanted to escape persecution and to create a new society.
A dream to change the Jewish nature from a nation of merchants and bankers to a nation of farmers and fighters.
In 1929, there was a serious clash here at the Western Wall, the holiest place in the world for Jewish prayer. More than 100,000 Jews had arrived in Palestine in the 1920s, and some had good relations with their Arab neighbors. But as immigration continued and as Arab land was sold for Jewish settlement, then tensions rose. The trouble here spread across Palestine. Religious Jews were massacred in Hebron. Hundreds died on both sides, and after that, nobody could have any illusions. The two communities were on a collision course.
Events in Europe brought the collision closer. After 1933, Hitler turned the power of the German state against the Jews.
I came after a year under Hitler in Vienna, which was a very, very bad year for me as a child. And I asked my parents to go away as fast as possible, and told them I don't want to remain in the hell.
Jewish refugee captures.
I think that people fired.
For the Israelis, the breakthrough was finding a cross-country route to ferry supplies and pump water that bypassed the Arab Legion's positions.
We assembled 13 jeeps. One of them belonged to Ben Gurion. We loaded them with about more than half a ton per jeep, medical supplies, ammunition, weapons. We knew exactly what the situation in Jerusalem is.
How important was it for the Jewish forces to hang on in Jerusalem?
It's unbelievable how people felt about Jerusalem. They knew that without Jerusalem there's no Jewish state.
On the southern front, the Egyptian army advanced north towards Tel Aviv, avoiding smaller Israeli settlements. But Kibbutz Yad Mordechai was too big to ignore. On the 24th of May, Egyptian armor and infantry attacked.
Here in front of me, I have no bullets and I have no rifles to reach them. I need a mortar, I need something. And I was very, very angry that I can't shoot there in front of me. And I can't do nothing because the distance is too wide. I have no rifle, I have no munition and no aims to defend myself or to attack them.
Outnumbered and out of ammunition, the Israeli forces had to retreat. But they had bought time to establish a defense line further north, where the Egyptians were stopped before they could reach Tel Aviv. After nearly a month's fighting, the United Nations secured a 4-week ceasefire. During the truce, both sides rearmed, but Israel had the edge, with big deliveries from Czechoslovakia of modern weapons, including heavy guns and aircraft. Although hugely outnumbered by Arabs in the Middle East, Israel was always able to mobilize more soldiers. It was now better equipped, organized, and motivated.
As far as you were concerned, it was a life or death struggle.
Absolutely. This was Israel's most fateful war. It was a case of to be or not to be.
When the ceasefire ended after a month, the Israelis were ready for what one of their top generals called a series of sharp, short, decisive, and victorious engagements. The priority was relieving the pressure on the Tel Aviv-Jerusalem axis. Lid and Ramleh, two adjoining Arab towns close to Tel Aviv, were the targets.
What happened here was one of the most controversial episodes of the entire war. The Israelis scored a major strategic victory. They secured Tel Aviv and the center of their new country. In the process, tens of thousands of Palestinian Arabs lost their homes, and hundreds of them lost their lives.
The Haganah killed dozens of Palestinians who were sheltering in a mosque.
some of them just left their houses and found this place as a refuge, most of the families. And they thought that this is the way they are very safe in this place. The Haganah army, when they got inside the city, you know, after fears of fighting between the Palestinians and the Haganah, they just came inside this mosque and they just killed all of the people inside here, women, children, old people, all of them were shot. It was a big massacre.
Some of the residents were forced to bury the bodies.
The army took us to the mosque to take the dead to the cemetery. We entered one room. There were 60 or 70 bodies inside. Later they covered them with clothes and poured petrol and set them on fire. There was a woman dressed in peasant clothes. Next to her were two little girls. We carried them and put them over there. They were the only ones who had a proper burial.
There's a controversy over whether Ben-Gurion authorized the expulsions from Lid and Ramleh. The Israeli commander who signed the order believed that he had. More than 50,000 Palestinians were forced out.
It's not a secret anymore. It was called Shoalei Shimshon, the wool of Samson, with jeeps, with the machine guns. It's not a secret anymore. Many things we did, we regret until today. We regret until today. And I think that, but in war you make mistakes. Anyhow, there was no clear order from Ben-Gurion how to deal with the inhabitants in an occupied village.
But could Israel have functioned with a big town like Ramleh, full of Arabs? Could you have built a state if you had that many Arabs living right in the center of the country?
No.
Many refugees died on the long walk to the Arab lines. The offensive ended with another UN truce. In 10 days of fighting, the Israeli general, Igal Alon, estimated that 20% of the effective Arab fighting force had been lost, and the War of Independence won, though not ended. In the remaining months of the war, there were more Israeli offensives, more Palestinians were forced out, and there were more ceasefires. Of the invaders, only the Arab Legion in Jerusalem and the West Bank could claim any success. The others were humiliated.
When the Second War came, it was not in favor of the Arabs. It was totally in favor of the Jews. Because there, the Jews were able to make victory in Naqab, in the south, and against the Syrians and Lebanese. We were left alone in the West Bank, defending ourselves.
By the time Israel seized the last corner of the Negev desert in March 1949, armistice talks had already started. Yad Mordechai was recaptured and became a symbol of Israeli resistance. From November 1947 to January 1949, around 6,000 Israelis, 1% of the population, had been killed.
What do you think would have happened if you hadn't won?
Well, the Arabs really gave the answer to that question, Jeremy. When someone said to them, but what happened to the Jews once you overrun them? He says, there won't be any Jews. They will have been drowned in the sea. And I have no doubt that it really would have been a Holocaust.
One estimate is that around 15,000 Arab soldiers and civilians were killed. Defeat made the Arab world even more unstable.
There was no balance between the forces of Israel and the forces of the Arabs. Because in wars, you don't only depend on the number of soldiers or the number of tanks. You have also to have political force, and you have to have a unity among those who are going to war. Unity did not exist among the Arab states.
Since 1948, the Israelis have built a modern state, the region's superpower, a homeland for the Jews. Palestinians believe it's all come on the back of their loss, and that troubles some Israelis too.
I have no doubt that the Arabs' deportation also helped the State of Israel. The truth should be said. It helped us because hundreds of thousands fled and new immigrants settled into their villages and towns. It's difficult to say, but this did happen. We didn't ask for it, but it happened nonetheless. On the other hand, the situation of an ongoing war, day after day, for 60 years, big wars with names, small wars with no names, the 1948 war is yet to end.
For all Israel's strength, its civilians still get killed by Palestinians. And with their civilians dying too, Palestinians believe that what they call the Nakba, the catastrophe of 1948, has never ended. The current peace process, sponsored by President Bush, will fail like all the others if it cannot solve problems that are hardwired to 1948. Partition is still on the agenda. They need to fix a border between Israel and a Palestinian state. Jerusalem is still claimed by both sides. And Palestinian refugees await a future.
Until 1948, that was a bare hill on the edge of Bethlehem. Now it's Dheisheh refugee camp. The original tents were replaced by permanent structures a long time ago, but there's no sense of permanence in the minds of the people who live there because for 60 years they have effectively been in limbo. The future of the Palestinian refugees is still one of the Middle East's great unsolved, politically toxic issues.
When the Palestinian camps were new 60 years ago, Israel was absorbing hundreds of thousands of Jewish refugees and migrants. Now almost all Israelis believe a mass influx of Palestinian refugees would destroy their state. A UN resolution on their return has never been implemented. Some Palestinian refugees, still dreaming of everything they lost, will not hear of compromise.
We said it more than once. Even if they give us heaven, we will not give up on our country. If they give us enough gold to fill this room, we will decline everything. Impossible. I will die and die a heretic. If you take £1 million in gold for an inch of Palestine, you die as a heretic. Not a Muslim, not a Christian, not a Jew, a heretic, and you go to hell.
And even though most Palestinians do accept that they will live alongside Israel, memory and history stand on every street corner.
My father has built here. You know, I feel my father, he was denied to live in, and he was dispossessed to live in this beautiful house. It's been now 60 years for most of the people. There are weaknesses. You want to advance, and I would want very much to compete and advance as much as the Israelis have advanced. But I'm a Palestinian. My land has been robbed by the Israelis.
We want them to have a state of their own, fair, independent, friendly. And they want it too. There is no division in our destinies. Our problem from our side is their division within themselves and their weakness.
Others believe the main problem is that Israel is still expansionist, breaking international law by settling Jews on occupied land that Palestinians say is theirs.
They don't want to give up territory. They want to squeeze the Palestinians. They want to take as much territory as they can and give the Palestinians as little as they can, which would not be conducive to a solution, a self-sustaining Palestinian state.
60 years ago, Arab propagandists boasted they would push the Jews into the Mediterranean. Plenty of Israelis suspect that's still something Palestinians would like to do.
Had they accepted in 1947 their part, half of Palestine, the mandate, we would have two countries since then and no conflict. But what they wanted is the whole country. They wanted to drive us into the sea, to kill the Jews. This is why they don't have anything today.
I will continue to resist in a non-violent resistance until we can coexist, until we can convince the Israelis that we want our freedom, but this does not mean that we want to destroy the state of Israel.
The long war of 1948 has consumed two peoples with two separate stories to tell. They'll have to find a way to live with its legacy if they ever want peace.
One day we shall have to shake hands and sit together. We can't continue fighting forever. We can't continue killing and killing and killing. There must be an end to it.
Next on BBC Two, playing for snooker's greatest prize, Ronnie O'Sullivan leads Annie Carter 6-2 in the World Championship final. And medieval myth-busting on BBC 4, Terry Jones takes issue with the romantic idea of the knight in shining armour.